Morning everyone. So the video for today is Eduqas English Literature Component 1 Section A, and this time round we're looking at the Macbeth whole play question. So in my last video, which I will try and put a link up to somewhere on the screen, we looked at how do you answer the extract question, the 15-mark question on this paper. Today we're going to look at that 25-mark whole play question. As always, quick overview. We're going to have a look at the previous questions, maybe think about what might come up this year, and then we're going to have a look at how do you answer that question. What can you do to make sure you're getting the marks that you deserve? So remember, this is your 2-hour paper. It's probably the first exam that you'll sit for English. In 2025, this exam falls on the 12th of May, and the first section is your Shakespeare text, We're Doing Macbeth, and your second section is the anthology poetry, which everybody does. You're spending 1 hour on each section, and that is broken down into 20 minutes on the extract question, and that's the same for the poetry, 20 minutes on the named poem, and then 40 minutes on the whole text question, the whole play question, which is 25 marks. 5 of those marks are for SPAG, and so that's something that's really important to have a good focus on this question. All right, so here are the previous questions that have come up, and in my last video we were looking at the extracts. This time around, we're going to have a look at some of the topics that have been set for the whole play questions. So you can see that last summer they asked the question, for which character in Macbeth do you have the most sympathy? That is a question that I can see Eduqas repeating for other texts. So if you also study Christmas Carol, then I would consider planning an answer for that question. If you also study Inspector Calls, I would consider planning an answer for something along the same lines. Then we've got Macbeth as the named character for one question, Lady Macbeth for 2, their relationship for another question, and then we have 2 topic or thematic questions that have come up already, violence and guilt. So what might we see coming up as you're beginning to revise? So it's very important to remember that because Eduqas want you to speak about the whole play from beginning to end, they want you to cover all 5 acts, there are some characters that they are probably not going to name individually. And that would be Duncan, Banquo, Macduff, Malcolm, the minor characters, because they aren't in the play enough for you to have them as the focus for your whole play question. It also means that you are likely then to have Macbeth and Lady Macbeth as the 2 central characters repeated as questions over and over, very similar in the same way that we would expect characters to be repeated in questions for an Inspector Calls. We would consider the witches, even though they only appear in a part of the play, we could see a question with the significance of the witches, because you can argue that they're a catalyst for a lot of the narrative, and there are supernatural incidences that happen enough that they can that it can be talked about in every single act. In terms of some of the ideas and topics that might come up, we've had guilt and violence. I wouldn't expect either of those to be repeated this year, but that isn't to say that they couldn't. Some of the other topics that might come up, so the idea of power and the abuse of power, and at this point I'm just going to caveat, be very wary of videos, particularly for other exam boards, where they tell you that the question is going to be about kingship. The concept of kingship, just that word, is probably too much of a complex word to be used for a whole play question, and so you would much more likely to be seeing a question come up about power. Then we've got the idea of good and evil and ambition. You could have a question that looks at the idea of loyalty and betrayal, or the truth and the lies. I would expect to see supernatural coming up, but then you've also got some of the things like fear and death, and there are a number of different topics, and this is why it's super important that you revise the play really well and you know it inside out, so that it doesn't matter what topic comes up, you've still got something to say. So as a reminder what the question looks like, 25-mark question, so 20 marks for the AO1 and AO2 of what you're writing, 5 marks for SPAG. This is the violence question, which I think was 2017. So Macbeth is a play about violence. Write about how Shakespeare presents violence at different points in Macbeth. Refer to characters and events in the play in your answer. And so that is reminding you that you are going through the play and you're looking at it in detail. So what does that want you to do? So ideas from the play about whatever your question topic is, evidence from lots of different parts of the play, and I'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. Once you've got those references, some inferences about how that shows the question topic, and some analysis of language and structure and stage directions from each act. Then you can talk about what Shakespeare was doing, Shakespeare's purpose, the audience's reaction. You do not need to talk explicitly about historical context in this essay unless it adds to your inference and analysis. If it doesn't add anything to your understanding of the play or the language of the play, then don't bother writing it because you're wasting your own time. All right, so your method for this then is about 10 minutes of planning, about 25 minutes of writing. You're looking for maybe 2 sides, 2.5 sides, and about 5 minutes to check, particularly for those SPAG marks. All right, so you're going to underline, highlight the question topic, make sure you know what it is. You're going to go through the play in order, picking up all of the key moments, thinking about how you're going to cover them, plan what references you are going to analyse, and then you write this up with your very quick 2-sentence introduction, which is 1 sentence introducing the play as a whole, the 2nd sentence introducing the topic, and then 1 paragraph per act. You want to be really smart about your references. So very varying ideas about how many references or how many quotes you need. I just want to remind you that unlike other exam boards, Eduqas emphasise this need for a breadth of knowledge right the way across the whole of the play. So that means extensive knowledge of everything that happens from Act 1 to 5, and then depth of knowledge where you are analysing some of Shakespeare's language and structure. So you're looking at 2 quotes per act as a minimum that you would want to be discussing in detail, but still discussing, referencing, name checking some of the key events that happen throughout the play. So what are the key events that happen that I think you should be referencing in every single essay that you write? So in Act 1, we've kind of got Act 1 is split into 2 halves really. So you've got the initial setup of the narrative with the battle and the prophecies and Macbeth's reaction. Then you've got Lady Macbeth's reaction to the letter and the plan to kill Duncan. And you would need to deal with those. That sets up lots of the narrative, and you would need to talk about all of those things. Act 2, you must talk about the murder of Duncan and the immediate aftermath. Remember, it's quite a small act, but it's very significant. Act 3 focuses on Banquo's murder, the banquet scene, and Banquo's ghost. So that's quite nice and precise. And in a lot of ways, you can deal with those all together quite well in a lot of detail. Act 4 is a savage act because we are in multiple locations in different countries with enormous numbers of different people. So Act 4 is the apparitions. Then we have the Macduff's family are being slaughtered. Then we have Macduff himself and Malcolm in England raising an army, and that's the scene where Malcolm tests Macduff's loyalty. Then we have the English preparing to invade, and again lots and lots and lots of things happening in that act that are very relevant for Act 5. Act 5 starts with Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking And as you know, she then dies off stage later on. We have the running series of battles between Macbeth and the invading English army, which culminates in the soldiers being camouflaged by the trees from Burnham Wood. Various fights happening, people on and off stage. We get to the final battle between, or the final fight, sword fight between Macduff and Macbeth. The witch's trick is being revealed, Macbeth is executed, and Malcolm is crowned. Again, all of those are very significant. That's Shakespeare tying up the edges of the story. That is goodness and righteousness being restored to Scotland, and so it's important that you deal with those. So, as a reminder, your method is, and something that you can do through your planning is, to take that list that I've just shown you on the previous screen and think about one of the topics that you could have, maybe the idea of supernatural, and go through the play in order and plan out what you would say and what your quotes are going to be and what quotes you're going to analyse in each act, so that you are planning essays rather than just revising the content of the play. I'm going to show you how to do that. So my next video is going to be a video where I take you through what my essay plan would be for a whole text question on power, so that you can use that as a model for some of your future essay planning, and it can show you what we're kind of expecting to see, what we're hoping to see in those essays. So good luck, keep going with your revision, you're nearly there.